The gallery was bathed in soft, golden light, every corner meticulously curated to highlight the most exquisite pieces of art. Rachel Sanders floated through the space with practiced elegance, her fitted black dress and understated pearls projecting an aura of sophistication. She was the star of the evening, the gallery owner, the charismatic host, and the wife of Daniel Sanders, the city's youngest and most celebrated district attorney. Daniel stood near the champagne table, his tall frame a contrast to the refined opulence of the setting. He was watching her. He always watched her. He told himself it was because he was proud of her success, proud of how she could command a room with little more than a smile. But tonight there was something else in his gaze, something deeper, darker. Rachel's laugh floated through the air as she chatted with a tall man in a sharp navy suit. His name was Nathan Cole, a prominent art dealer from New York. Daniel had met him before, briefly, at a charity event Rachel had insisted they attend. There was something about Nathan that Daniel couldn't shake. His perfect smile, the way he seemed too comfortable in every space. And the way Rachel leaned in just a little too close when she spoke to him. "Enjoying the party, Mr. Sanders?" A voice interrupted his thoughts. It was Sylvia, one of Rachel's assistants. Daniel nodded and forced a smile. "Beautiful evening as always." Sylvia gave a polite nod and moved on, leaving Daniel to continue his silent vigil. The tension in his chest grew tighter with every passing moment. The way Rachel's hand lingered on Nathan's arm as she spoke. The way their heads leaned together, as though sharing secrets. He couldn't shake the unease that had been building for weeks. Rachel had become distant. Not overtly so, there were no screaming arguments or slammed doors. But there were small changes. The late nights at the gallery. The sudden need for privacy when she took phone calls. The glances at her phone that seemed heavier with meaning than before. When Rachel finally extricated herself from Nathan and joined him, Daniel tried to read her face. Her smile was warm, genuine, or at least it appeared so. "You've been quiet tonight," she said, brushing a hand over his arm. "Something on your mind?" Daniel took a sip of champagne, buying himself a moment. "Just admiring how well you've put this together. You've outdone yourself." Her smile widened, but her eyes darted briefly toward Nathan, who was now speaking with a small group of collectors. "Thanks," she said lightly. "It's been a lot of work." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Nathan seems interesting." Rachel tilted her head, feigning casual interest. "He's one of the best in the business. His network is incredible. He's helped us get some amazing pieces." Daniel nodded, keeping his tone even. "How well do you know him?" Her laugh was soft, dismissive. "Oh, don't start with that, Daniel. He's a business contact. That's all." Her response was quick, too quick. Daniel felt a cold weight settle in his stomach, but he said nothing more. He had learned that pressing her in public led nowhere. The evening ended late, with Rachel entertaining a few lingering guests while Daniel excused himself to head home. He sat in the dim light of their kitchen, staring at his untouched glass of whiskey, when Rachel finally walked through the door. Her heels clicked against the tile, and her perfume lingered in the air as she approached. "You didn't have to wait up," she said softly, setting her purse on the counter. Daniel looked up at her, his eyes sharp. "We need to talk." Rachel hesitated, her expression flickering with something he couldn't quite place. Guilt, perhaps? She recovered quickly, pulling off her earrings. "Can it wait? I'm exhausted." "No, it can't," Daniel said firmly, standing and crossing the room. "I need you to tell me what's going on." Rachel's brows furrowed. "What are you talking about?" "You know exactly what I'm talking about," he said, his voice low and edged with anger. "The late nights. The phone calls. And tonight with Nathan." "Stop," Rachel interrupted, her voice sharp. "You're being paranoid." Daniel stepped closer, his jaw tight. "Paranoid? You're acting like you're hiding something, Rachel. Don't lie to me." She glared at him, her own temper flaring. "I'm not lying to you, Daniel. And I don't appreciate being accused of something I haven't done." For a moment, the room was silent, the tension between them crackling like static electricity. Finally, Rachel turned away, grabbing her purse. "I'm going to bed. If you want to act like a jealous, insecure child, that's on you." Daniel stood frozen as she walked away, her heels clicking against the floor. His hands clenched into fists at his sides as he struggled to control the storm of emotions swirling inside him. He wanted to believe her, wanted to trust her. But deep down, he knew there was more to the story. He picked up his phone and opened his contacts. His thumb hovered over the name, Logan Pierce, a private investigator he'd worked with on a few cases. He didn't want to do this. He didn't want to believe it had come to this. But as Rachel's retreating figure disappeared up the stairs, he pressed the call button. The next morning, Daniel was up before dawn. The house was quiet, the hum of the refrigerator and the soft creak of floorboards under his feet the only sounds as he moved through the kitchen. His mind churned, replaying the previous night's confrontation with Rachel. He hated how easily she had dismissed his concerns, turning his questions into accusations of insecurity. His phone buzzed, breaking through his thoughts. It was Logan Pierce, the private investigator. "Morning, Daniel." Logan's gravelly voice came through the line. "Got your call last night. What's going on?" Daniel hesitated, staring at his empty coffee mug. "I need you to look into something." "Someone." Logan waited silently, his patience as steady as his reputation. Daniel finally continued, his voice tight. "Rachel. My wife. And a man named Nathan Cole. He's an art dealer she's been working with." "Got it," Logan said. "What am I looking for?" "Anything," Daniel said, his jaw clenching. "Anything that doesn't add up." "Understood. I'll need her schedule, any habits you've noticed, and anything specific you suspect." Daniel exhaled slowly. "She works at the gallery 6 days a week, but lately she's been staying late. She's on her phone a lot, and she's been secretive about her plans. Nathan's been hanging around more, and something about him doesn't sit right with me." Logan made a few notes before responding. "I'll start digging. Give me a day or two to see what I can find." "Thanks, Logan," Daniel said quietly, ending the call. Rachel came downstairs an hour later, looking fresh and radiant as if their tense exchange hadn't happened. Her hair fell in soft waves over her shoulders, and her tailored blouse and pencil skirt gave her an air of effortless sophistication. "Morning," she said casually, pouring herself a cup of coffee. Daniel studied her, his emotions roiling beneath the surface. "Morning." Her phone buzzed on the counter. Rachel glanced at the screen, her lips curving into a faint smile. She quickly picked it up and typed a response before sliding the phone into her purse. "Busy day at the gallery?" Daniel asked, his tone neutral. "Always," she replied, sipping her coffee. "Nathan's bringing in a few new pieces, so we'll be setting up a private viewing for some collectors." There it was again. "Nathan." Daniel nodded, keeping his face impassive. "Sounds exciting." "It is," Rachel said, her eyes sparkling. "These pieces could bring in a fortune for the gallery." "Good for you," Daniel said, forcing a smile. "I'm proud of how much you've accomplished." Rachel seemed caught off guard by his words, her smile faltering briefly. "Thanks, Daniel. That means a lot." As she grabbed her bag and headed for the door, Daniel followed her to the foyer. "Be careful out there," he said softly, his voice tinged with meaning. Rachel turned back, her expression unreadable. "Always." After Rachel left, Daniel spent the day immersed in court cases, but his mind kept drifting back to her. The way she smiled at her phone. The way her eyes lit up when she talked about Nathan. He knew he couldn't let his suspicions consume him, but the gnawing doubt was impossible to ignore. By mid-afternoon, Logan called with an update. "Daniel, I've got something," Logan said. "It's not much yet, but it's a start." "What is it?" Daniel asked, gripping the edge of his desk. "Rachel's gallery isn't just selling art. It looks like they're moving high-value pieces under the table, private deals with questionable provenance. And Nathan Cole? He's at the center of it. His name's tied to a few shady transactions overseas. Daniel's blood ran cold. Are you saying they're dealing in stolen art? Possibly, Logan said. I need more time to confirm, but it's a strong lead. Daniel leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. If Rachel was involved in something illegal, it could ruin her career, and his. His position as district attorney meant he had to remain above reproach, and any connection to a scandal like this could destroy him. Keep digging, Daniel said, his voice hard. And keep it quiet. I need to know exactly what's going on. You've got it, Logan said. That evening, Daniel sat at the dinner table, his appetite non-existent as Rachel recounted her day. Her words flowed effortlessly, but Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that every sentence was rehearsed, carefully constructed to hide the truth. And Nathan was so helpful, she said, slicing into her chicken. He really knows how to charm the clients. Daniel forced a smile. Sounds like a valuable partner. Rachel nodded, sipping her wine. He is. He's been a huge asset to the gallery. Daniel set down his fork, the tension in his chest becoming unbearable. How well do you really know him, Rachel? Her hand paused midair, the wineglass halfway to her lips. What do you mean? You spend a lot of time with him, Daniel said carefully. I just want to make sure you're not getting too close. Rachel's eyes flashed with irritation. Daniel, we've been through this. Nathan is a colleague. That's all. Daniel held her gaze, searching for any sign of dishonesty. I hope you're right. Rachel sighed, setting down her glass. I don't know what else to say to convince you. I'm doing my job, Daniel. I wish you'd trust me. Daniel didn't respond. He couldn't. His instincts screamed that there was more to the story, but he couldn't confront her without proof. Not yet. As Rachel cleared the plates, Daniel's phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from Logan. Got something. Need to meet. Urgent. Daniel's heart pounded as he replied, setting up a meeting for later that night. He glanced at Rachel, who was humming softly as she loaded the dishwasher. She looked so innocent, so normal. But Daniel knew better. The threads were starting to unravel, and soon, the truth would be impossible to hide. Daniel parked his car a block away from the dimly lit diner where he had arranged to meet Logan. The neon sign buzzed faintly in the night, casting an eerie red glow over the cracked pavement. Pulling his coat tighter against the chill, Daniel stepped inside, scanning the nearly empty room. Logan sat in a corner booth, his expression as unreadable as ever. Daniel, Logan said, standing briefly to shake his hand before gesturing for him to sit. Glad you could make it. Daniel slid into the booth, his nerves raw. What did you find? Logan wasted no time, pulling out a thin manila folder and sliding it across the table. This is the start of a bigger picture. Rachel's gallery, under the guise of legitimate art dealing, is connected to several high-value pieces that have been flagged as stolen or forged. And Nathan Cole is the common denominator. Daniel opened the folder and scanned the contents. Photographs of artwork, transaction receipts, and shipping records painted a damning portrait. His stomach churned as he read further. Logan continued, his voice low and measured. Cole's been implicated in laundering stolen art through smaller galleries like Rachel's. It's a sophisticated operation, under-the-table sales, falsified provenance documents, and shell companies to mask the money trail. But here's where it gets interesting. Logan leaned forward, lowering his voice further. Rachel isn't just a pawn in this. I found messages between her and Cole discussing pieces in detail. She knows what's going on. Daniel's grip on the folder tightened. You're sure? Logan nodded grimly. I wouldn't bring it to you unless I was. It's not just a business connection either. There's something personal between them. Their communication goes beyond professional, late-night calls, encrypted messages. I don't need to spell it out. Daniel's pulse thundered in his ears. He slammed the folder shut, his jaw tightening. How do we prove it? I've got someone digging deeper into Cole's financials. If we can link Rachel directly to the money trail, you'll have all the proof you need. But you need to be prepared for what comes next. Daniel's hands clenched into fists. What do you mean? Logan hesitated, choosing his words carefully. This isn't just infidelity, Daniel. If Rachel's involved in this operation, she's committing serious crimes. And if it blows up, you'll be collateral damage. The district attorney married to a criminal? You'll lose everything. Daniel stared at the table, his mind racing. The weight of the revelation threatened to crush him. For years, he had believed in the integrity of his marriage, the strength of their bond. And now, that foundation was crumbling beneath him. I need more proof, Daniel said finally, his voice hard. Something irrefutable. And I need to confront her. Logan raised an eyebrow. Confront her? Daniel, that's dangerous. If she knows you're onto her, she could bury evidence or tip off Cole. I don't care. Daniel snapped. I won't let her get away with this. Daniel returned home that night to find the house dark. Rachel was asleep, curled up on her side of the bed, her face serene. He stood in the doorway, watching her for a long moment, the fury inside him clashing with the memories of the woman he had once loved so completely. He lay down beside her, staring at the ceiling, his mind racing. Every touch, every word, every glance she had given him felt like a lie. He had to know the truth, and he would do whatever it took to get it. The following day, Daniel began putting his plan into motion. He kept his demeanor calm, even affectionate, as he watched Rachel closely. Every word she said, every glance at her phone, every subtle change in her routine became a clue. Busy day today? He asked over breakfast. Rachel nodded, stirring her coffee. Nathan wants to review the new acquisitions before the private viewing next week. I'll probably be home late. Daniel forced a smile. Of course. I know how much this means to you. Rachel's lips curved into a soft smile. Thanks for understanding. Daniel watched her leave, his jaw tightening as the door closed behind her. Once she was gone, he picked up his phone and called Logan. Follow her, Daniel said, his voice sharp. I want to know where she goes, who she sees, and what she's doing. I need everything. Already on it, Logan replied. You'll have updates by tonight. That evening, as Rachel worked late at the gallery, Daniel waited in the darkened living room, nursing a glass of whiskey. The hours dragged by, each one filled with seething anger and mounting anticipation. When Rachel finally walked through the door, her heels clicking against the floor, Daniel stood. You're up late, Rachel said, setting her bag down. Her tone was casual, but there was a flicker of unease in her eyes. I couldn't sleep, Daniel said evenly, his gaze fixed on her. Thought I'd wait up for you. Rachel hesitated, her hand tightening on her bag. Is something wrong? Is there something you want to tell me, Rachel? Daniel asked, his voice deceptively calm. Rachel's eyes widened slightly. What are you talking about? Daniel stepped closer, his jaw clenched. Don't play dumb. I know, Rachel. About Nathan. About the gallery. About everything. Rachel's face went pale, and for a moment, she looked as though she might faint. But then her expression hardened, and she straightened her shoulders. You've been spying on me, she said, her voice trembling with anger. How dare you? How dare I? Daniel roared, his control slipping. How dare you, Rachel? How dare you lie to me, betray me, and destroy everything we've built? Rachel flinched at his words, but she quickly regained her composure. You don't know what you're talking about. Daniel stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Oh, I know exactly what I'm talking about. And if you think you can keep this up, you're dead wrong. Rachel stood frozen in the foyer, her hand gripping the strap of her bag so tightly her knuckles turned white. Daniel's words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating, filling the silence with a tension that threatened to snap. Daniel, she began, her voice soft, almost pleading. You're upset, but this isn't what you think. Don't, Daniel snapped, his tone cutting like a blade. Don't insult me by pretending this isn't real. I've seen the messages, Rachel. I know about the gallery, Nathan, all of it. Her face paled further, her lips trembling as she struggled to maintain her composure. You don't understand. Then explain it to me, Daniel bellowed, his voice echoing off the walls. He slammed his whiskey glass onto the coffee table, the sharp sound making Rachel flinch. Explain how my wife became a criminal. Explain how you thought you could do this behind my back and I wouldn't find out. Rachel's eyes glistened, but she quickly blinked the tears away. She set her bag down and took a step forward, her hands outstretched in an attempt to calm him. Daniel, please, she said softly, her voice trembling. Let me explain. Daniel's jaw clenched as he glared at her. Start talking. Rachel sat on the edge of the couch, her hands wringing together as she gathered her thoughts. Daniel stood over her, arms crossed, his piercing gaze unwavering. It wasn't supposed to be like this, Rachel began, her voice barely above a whisper. When Nathan approached me about the private sales, he made it sound harmless. He said it was just a way to help smaller artists get noticed, to make the gallery more exclusive. I didn't realize. Don't lie to me, Rachel, Daniel interrupted, his voice cold. You knew exactly what you were getting into. I've seen the records, the messages. This wasn't a mistake. This was a choice. Rachel's face crumpled, a single tear slipping down her cheek. I didn't think it would go this far. I didn't think I'd get trapped. Daniel scoffed, pacing the room. Trapped? Is that what you call it? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you enjoyed every minute of it. The late nights, the secret meetings with Nathan, what part of that was you being trapped? It wasn't like that, Rachel cried, her voice breaking. Yes, I made mistakes. I let things go too far. But I never wanted to hurt you. Daniel whirled on her, his eyes blazing. Never wanted to hurt me? Rachel, you've been lying to my face for months. You've been stealing, cheating, destroying everything we built. Don't you dare tell me you didn't want to hurt me. Rachel buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Daniel stared at her, his anger warring with a deep, aching sense of betrayal. This was the woman he had built his life around, the woman he had trusted more than anyone. And now she was a stranger. After several moments, Rachel looked up, her face streaked with tears. Nathan pressured me, Daniel. He said if I didn't go along with it, he'd ruin me. The gallery, my reputation, it would all be over. Daniel's voice was sharp as he replied. And what about us? Did you think about what this would do to me? To our marriage? I didn't know what else to do, Rachel whispered. I felt trapped. I was scared. Daniel shook his head, his expression hard. You had options, Rachel. You could have come to me. But instead you chose to lie. You chose him. Rachel's eyes flashed with anger, her tears forgotten. Do you think this is all on me? Do you think I wanted this? I made mistakes, yes, but you're not blameless, Daniel. You've been so consumed with your career, your cases. When was the last time you even noticed me? Really noticed me? Daniel's mouth opened to respond, but the words caught in his throat. He wanted to argue, to tell her she was wrong, but deep down, he knew there was truth in her words. That doesn't justify what you've done, he said finally, his voice quieter but no less firm. You don't fix a broken marriage by tearing it apart even more. Rachel stared at him, her expression a mixture of defiance and regret. I didn't set out to destroy us, Daniel. But I can't change what's happened. No, Daniel said, his voice hardening again. But you can start by telling me everything. No more lies, Rachel. No more excuses. If you want any chance of fixing this, you're going to tell me everything, starting with your relationship with Nathan. Rachel's breath hitched, and she looked away, her silence speaking louder than words. Answer me, Daniel demanded, stepping closer. Did you sleep with him? Rachel's head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock. No! I swear to you, it wasn't like that. Then what was it? Daniel pressed, his tone sharp. Because I've seen the way you look at him. The way you talk about him. If it wasn't physical, then what? Rachel hesitated, her gaze dropping to the floor. It was emotional, she admitted finally. I let him get too close. I confided in him when I shouldn't have. But it never went further than that. Daniel stared at her, his jaw tight, his fists clenched at his sides. He wanted to believe her. He wanted to believe that this nightmare could still be salvaged. But the doubt lingered, gnawing at him like a wound that refused to heal. This isn't over, Daniel said finally, his voice cold. Not by a long shot. He turned and walked out of the room, leaving Rachel sitting on the couch, her face buried in her hands. Later that night, as Rachel slept fitfully in their bed, Daniel sat in his office, staring at the folder Logan had given him. He knew there was more to the story, there had to be. And he would uncover every last detail, no matter what it cost him. He picked up his phone and called Logan. We need to escalate, he said. I want every message, every transaction, every meeting. I want to know everything Nathan and Rachel are hiding. Understood, Logan replied. But be careful, Daniel. This is a dangerous game. Daniel's jaw tightened. I'm not afraid of danger. I'm afraid of losing everything. The following days were a whirlwind of tension, secrecy, and investigation. Daniel moved through his life like a man caught in a storm. His focus split between his duties at work and the gnawing questions surrounding Rachel and Nathan. Every moment he spent near her felt like navigating a minefield, every glance and word charged with unspoken truths. Rachel, for her part, seemed to have retreated into herself. She avoided prolonged conversations, kept her distance, and was more guarded than ever. Her eyes no longer met his with the same confidence, and her once effortless charm now felt forced, strained. That Thursday, Daniel received a message from Logan, meet me at the usual place. I have something big. When Daniel walked into the diner that evening, Logan was already waiting, his expression more serious than Daniel had ever seen. He slid into the booth, his pulse quickening. What is it? Daniel asked, his voice low. Logan didn't waste time. He handed Daniel a USB drive. Everything you need is on there. Emails, phone records, and surveillance footage. I had to call in a few favors to get this, so it's airtight. Daniel's hands clenched around the drive as Logan continued. Rachel and Nathan have been in constant communication for months, Logan said. Encrypted apps, burner phones, the whole 9 yards. And it's not just professional. Their messages are personal, intimate. Nothing explicitly physical, but there's enough there to connect the dots. Daniel's stomach churned. What about the gallery? Logan nodded grimly. They'd been using it as a front to launder stolen art. The sales records and provenance documents are fabricated, and Nathan's been funneling the profits through offshore accounts. Rachel's name is all over the paperwork. Whether she knew the full scope or not, she's neck-deep in this. Daniel stared at the USB drive, his mind reeling. This wasn't just betrayal, it was a criminal enterprise, one that could bring their entire world crashing down. There's more, Logan said, his tone darker. Nathan's been using Rachel to gain access to you. Daniel's head snapped up. What? Logan leaned closer. He's been asking Rachel questions about your cases, your connections, your vulnerabilities. He's not just some art dealer. He's tied to some serious players in the black market, and he's been playing you both from the start. Daniel's blood ran cold. You're saying she's been spying on me? Whether she knows it or not, that's exactly what's happening, Logan said. Nathan's using her to gather intel on you. He's smart, Daniel. He's playing a long game. Daniel drove home that night in a fog of anger and disbelief. When he stepped into the house, the lights were dim, and Rachel was in the kitchen, stirring a pot of soup. She looked up as he entered, her expression guarded. You're home late, she said cautiously. I had work, Daniel replied, his voice flat. He moved past her, setting his briefcase on the counter. Smells good. Rachel hesitated, as if sensing the tension. It's chicken noodle. Thought we could use something comforting. Daniel nodded absently, his mind elsewhere. He couldn't confront her. Not yet. He needed a plan, a way to expose the truth without tipping his hand. He needed to make sure Nathan paid for everything he'd done, not just to Rachel, but to him as well. That night, Daniel sat in his office, staring at the USB drive Logan had given him. He plugged it into his laptop and began sifting through the files. The evidence was damning. Messages between Rachel and Nathan painted a picture of a relationship that went far beyond business. They shared inside jokes, exchanged compliments, and spoke of their future plans, with a familiarity that made Daniel's blood boil. But it was the surveillance footage that hit him the hardest. There, in grainy black and white, was Rachel and Nathan in a dimly lit cafe. Their heads leaned close together, their hands brushing on the table. Her laughter was visible even without sound, her face lit with an expression Daniel hadn't seen in months. She looked happy. Alive. And it wasn't with him. Daniel slammed his laptop shut, his chest heaving with rage. He wanted to storm into their bedroom, confront her, demand answers. But he knew it wouldn't solve anything. He needed to be strategic. He needed to dismantle Nathan's operation piece by piece. The next day, Daniel called Logan. "Let's take this to the next level," Daniel said. "I want eyes on Nathan. His home, his office, everywhere. I want to know who he meets, where he goes, what he's planning." "Understood," Logan said. "But you need to be careful, Daniel. Guys like Nathan don't play fair. If he suspects anything, he won't hesitate to go after you, or Rachel." Daniel's jaw tightened. "I'm not afraid of him." "Maybe not," Logan said. "But don't underestimate him. He's a predator, and predators don't back down when they're cornered." That evening, Rachel came home later than usual. She set her bag down and gave Daniel a wary look. "Long day?" Daniel asked, his tone deceptively calm. "Yeah," Rachel said, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "There was an issue with one of the new pieces. Nathan and I had to sort it out." Daniel's heart pounded, but he kept his expression neutral. "Must have been important." "It was," Rachel said, her voice tight. "Everything's fine now, though." Daniel nodded, his eyes boring into hers. "Good." As Rachel walked upstairs, Daniel remained in the living room, his fists clenched. He knew the truth now, and it was only a matter of time before everything unraveled. But if Rachel thought she could keep lying to him, she was sorely mistaken. Daniel's world felt like a carefully balanced house of cards, each passing day threatening to bring the whole thing crashing down. Rachel continued her routine as if nothing was wrong, playing the part of the dutiful wife and successful gallery owner. But Daniel could see the cracks in her facade, her nervous glances, the way she hesitated when he asked about her day. Every lie she told felt like a knife in his gut. And every interaction with Nathan felt like another insult he was forced to endure. The following evening, Daniel made his move. He arrived home early, his mood cold and calculating. Rachel was already there, her laptop open on the kitchen counter as she scrolled through emails. "You're home early," she said, glancing up with a faint smile. Daniel nodded, hanging his coat on the back of a chair. "Figured I'd call it a day. How was your meeting with Nathan?" Rachel stiffened almost imperceptibly before masking it with a casual shrug. "Fine. Just some logistical stuff for the private viewing." "Logistical stuff," Daniel repeated, his tone neutral. "Sounds important." "It is," Rachel replied, her voice tight. "We're expecting some big buyers." Daniel poured himself a glass of whiskey and leaned against the counter, watching her. "You've been working late a lot recently. It must be exhausting." Rachel hesitated, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. "It's part of the job. You know how demanding it can be." Daniel's lips curled into a faint smile, but his eyes remained hard. "I do. And I also know when someone's hiding something." Rachel froze, her face paling slightly. "What are you talking about?" Daniel stepped closer, his voice low and cold. "I'm talking about Nathan. About the gallery. About you." Rachel's breath hitched, and she looked away, her hands trembling slightly. "Daniel, please." No more lies, Rachel, Daniel interrupted, his voice rising. I know everything. The stolen art. The money laundering. Your little affair with Nathan. You thought you could play me, but you underestimated me. Rachel's eyes filled with tears, but Daniel felt no sympathy. Her tears were just another manipulation, another attempt to control the narrative. You don't understand, Rachel whispered, her voice breaking. It's not what you think. Then explain it to me, Daniel snapped. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been lying to me for months while helping a criminal use our marriage as a shield. Rachel's hands clenched into fists, her face crumpling with a mixture of anger and despair. I didn't want this, Daniel. I didn't ask for any of it. Nathan, he pressured me. He said if I didn't go along with the deals, he'd ruin me. He'd ruin us. And you believed him? Daniel spat, his voice laced with disbelief. You let him manipulate you into betraying me, into destroying everything we've built? Rachel's tears spilled over, but she didn't look away. I was scared, Daniel. I thought I could handle it, that I could keep it separate from us. I didn't mean for it to go this far. Daniel stared at her, his chest heaving with rage. You didn't mean for it to go this far? You let it go this far, Rachel. You chose this. Rachel sobbed quietly as Daniel turned away, pacing the room like a caged animal. The weight of her betrayal pressed down on him, suffocating him with its intensity. I can fix this, Rachel said suddenly, her voice trembling. I'll talk to Nathan. I'll get out of it. Daniel turned on her, his eyes blazing. You think it's that simple? You think you can just walk away from him? I have to try, Rachel insisted. For us. For us? Daniel repeated, his voice dripping with sarcasm. You think there's an us left after this? Rachel flinched, her tears falling faster. I'm sorry, Daniel. I know I've hurt you. But I love you. I do. Daniel laughed bitterly, shaking his head. Love? You don't betray someone you love, Rachel. You don't lie to their face, or help some two-bit criminal use their name to cover his tracks. Rachel collapsed onto a chair, burying her face in her hands. What do you want me to do, Daniel? Tell me, and I'll do it. I'll do anything. Daniel stared at her for a long moment, his jaw tight, his hands clenched at his sides. Part of him wanted to believe her, to let her try to fix the mess she'd created. But the other part, the part consumed by anger and betrayal, wanted nothing more than to see her and Nathan pay for what they'd done. I want you to give me everything you have on Nathan, Daniel said finally, his voice cold and hard. Emails, messages, records, everything. No excuses, no lies. Rachel looked up at him, her eyes wide and pleading. Daniel, if I do that, he'll know. He'll come after me. Good, Daniel said sharply. Let him. Because if you don't, I will. Rachel stared at him, her tears slowing as the weight of his words sank in. Slowly, she nodded, her shoulders sagging in defeat. Okay, she whispered. Okay, I'll do it. Good, Daniel said, his tone final. Because this is your one chance, Rachel. If you lie to me again, we're done. Later that night, as Rachel sifted through her files, Daniel watched her from the doorway, his expression unreadable. He didn't trust her, not anymore. But he would use her, just as Nathan had, to get what he needed. And when the time came, he would make sure Nathan paid for everything. Rachel sat at the dining table, her laptop open in front of her, her fingers trembling as she scrolled through her emails. The tension in the room was suffocating, Daniel's presence looming behind her like a shadow. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed, his expression cold and unyielding. You said you'd give me everything, Daniel said sharply, breaking the silence. Start talking. Rachel flinched at his tone but nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. I saved everything on a private drive. I didn't want anyone at the gallery to see it. Good, Daniel said, stepping closer. Where's the drive? It's at the gallery, Rachel admitted. In my office safe. Daniel's eyes narrowed. You mean to tell me the evidence that could bury both you and Nathan is sitting in your gallery office? Rachel looked up at him, her eyes pleading. I didn't know what else to do. If I kept it here, you might have found it before I had a chance to explain. Daniel let out a humorless laugh. Explain? You mean lie. Daniel, please, Rachel said, her voice cracking. I'm trying to make this right. No, Daniel snapped. You're trying to save yourself. Don't mistake that for doing the right thing. The next morning, Daniel called Logan and filled him in on the situation. She has a drive with everything we need, Daniel said. Emails, transactions, messages, enough to take Nathan down. Logan was quiet for a moment before responding. And Rachel? Daniel hesitated, his jaw tightening. We'll deal with her later. Right now, the priority is Nathan. All right, Logan said. What's the plan? I'll get the drive, Daniel said firmly. Once we have it, we'll figure out our next move. Be careful, Logan warned. If Nathan catches wind of this, he won't hesitate to retaliate. I'm counting on it, Daniel replied, his voice cold. That evening, Daniel drove Rachel to the gallery. She sat in the passenger seat, her hands clutching her purse tightly, her face pale and tense. Do you really think this is going to work? Rachel asked, her voice shaking. It has to, Daniel replied, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. If you're telling the truth about what's on that drive, it's our best shot at bringing him down. Rachel didn't respond. She stared out the window, her mind racing with thoughts of Nathan and the consequences of betraying him. When they arrived at the gallery, the space was dimly lit, the faint glow of security lights casting long shadows across the room. Rachel unlocked the door with trembling hands, her movements hesitant. Daniel followed her inside, his gaze sweeping the room. Where's your office? Rachel gestured toward the back of the gallery. Down the hall. Let's go, Daniel said, his voice curt. In Rachel's office, she knelt in front of the safe, her fingers fumbling as she entered the combination. The click of the lock releasing echoed in the quiet room, and she opened the safe to reveal a sleek black external drive nestled among a stack of papers. This is it, Rachel said, holding the drive up. Daniel took it from her, his grip firm. Is there anything else? Anything you're not telling me? Rachel shook her head quickly. No. That's everything. Daniel studied her for a moment before nodding. Let's go. As they turned to leave, the sound of footsteps echoed from the front of the gallery. Daniel froze, his hand instinctively moving to the small of his back where he kept his concealed pistol. Stay behind me, he whispered, his voice low and commanding. Rachel nodded, her eyes wide with fear as she clung to his arm. Daniel stepped into the main gallery, his movements slow and deliberate. A figure stood near the entrance, silhouetted against the glass doors. As Daniel approached, the figure turned, and his blood ran cold. It was Nathan. Well, Nathan said, his voice smooth and mocking. I didn't expect to find you here, Daniel. Or you, Rachel. Daniel's jaw tightened. What are you doing here, Nathan? I could ask you the same thing. Nathan replied, his eyes gleaming with amusement. But I think I already know. Daniel didn't respond, his hand inching closer to his pistol. Nathan's gaze flicked to the bag slung over Daniel's shoulder, a sly smile curving his lips. Let me guess, Nathan said. Rachel finally cracked, didn't she? Gave you the drive, thinking it would solve all your problems. Daniel's grip on the bag tightened. You don't scare me, Nathan. Nathan laughed softly, shaking his head. You should be scared, Daniel. You've stepped into a game you don't understand. And now you're in over your head. Maybe, Daniel said, his voice cold. But you've underestimated me. Nathan's smile faded, his eyes narrowing. Careful, Daniel. You don't want to make this worse than it already is. I think we're past that point, Daniel said, his tone sharp. Nathan took a step closer, his posture tense. Give me the drive, Daniel. Walk away now, and I'll pretend this never happened. Daniel's jaw clenched. Not a chance. For a moment, the two men stood facing each other, the tension crackling like static electricity. Then Nathan's eyes flicked to Rachel, his expression softening. "Rachel," he said, his voice almost gentle, "you don't have to do this. We can fix this, together." Rachel's breath hitched, her gaze darting between Nathan and Daniel. Her lips trembled, but she didn't speak. "Don't listen to him," Daniel said firmly. "He's just trying to manipulate you." Nathan's eyes hardened as he turned back to Daniel. "You're making a mistake." Daniel stepped forward, his eyes blazing with fury. "The only mistake I made was letting you get this close to my wife." The tension reached a breaking point as Nathan's hand twitched toward his jacket. Daniel's pistol was out in an instant, the barrel trained on Nathan's chest. "Don't," Daniel said, his voice deadly. "Don't even think about it." Nathan raised his hands slowly, a smirk tugging at his lips. "This isn't over, Daniel." "No," Daniel said coldly. "It's just getting started." Nathan stepped back slowly, his hands raised, but the smirk never left his face. Daniel's pistol remained trained on him, steady despite the rage simmering beneath the surface. Rachel stood frozen behind Daniel, her hands gripping the edge of the desk as if the weight of the moment might otherwise send her crashing to the floor. "You're making a mistake, Daniel," Nathan said, his voice calm despite the tension. "You have no idea what you're dealing with." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Enlighten me." Nathan chuckled softly, lowering his hands slightly. "You think this ends with me? I'm just one piece of the puzzle. There are people involved in this who won't take kindly to you sticking your nose where it doesn't belong. People who don't care about your badge or your principles." Daniel took a step forward, the pistol unwavering. "You mean the people you've been laundering stolen art for?" "I know all about them, Nathan. And you're going to help me take them down." Nathan raised an eyebrow, his smirk widening. "You really think I'll roll over just because you've got a gun? You're out of your depth, Daniel. Walk away while you still can." "I'm not going anywhere," Daniel growled. "And neither are you." Nathan's confidence faltered slightly, the realization of Daniel's resolve finally sinking in. He glanced at Rachel, who remained rooted to the spot, her face pale and her eyes wide with fear. "Rachel," Nathan said, his tone softening, "you don't have to do this. You don't have to let him ruin everything." Rachel's lips parted as if to respond, but Daniel cut her off. "Enough," Daniel snapped. "You don't get to manipulate her anymore. This ends tonight." Nathan's smirk vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating expression. "You don't understand, Daniel. If you take me down, you'll be putting a target on your own back. And hers." Daniel's eyes narrowed. "That's a risk I'm willing to take." Nathan took another step back, his hands still raised. "Fine. Have it your way. But don't say I didn't warn you." As Nathan moved toward the door, Daniel kept his pistol trained on him. "Don't think about disappearing, Nathan. You're not as untouchable as you think." Nathan paused, turning slightly to look over his shoulder. "Neither are you." His voice was cold, the threat unmistakable. When the door clicked shut behind him, Daniel lowered his pistol, his shoulders heaving with barely restrained fury. He turned to Rachel, who was still standing motionless, her face streaked with tears. "You're lucky he didn't try anything," Daniel said, his voice sharp. "Because I wouldn't have hesitated." Rachel flinched at his words, her gaze dropping to the floor. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I didn't know it would come to this." Daniel shook his head, running a hand through his hair. "Sorry isn't enough, Rachel. You brought this into our lives. You let him into our marriage. And now we're both in the crosshairs." Rachel sank into the nearest chair, burying her face in her hands. "I never wanted this. I thought I could handle it. I thought—" "You thought wrong," Daniel interrupted, his tone cutting. "And now it's on me to clean up your mess." The drive home was silent, the tension between them thick enough to choke on. Rachel stared out the window, her fingers twisting nervously in her lap. Daniel's grip on the steering wheel was tight, his jaw clenched as he replayed the confrontation with Nathan in his mind. When they finally pulled into the driveway, Daniel turned off the engine but didn't move to get out of the car. Instead, he sat in silence, his gaze fixed on the darkened house. "What now?" Rachel asked quietly, her voice barely audible. Daniel exhaled slowly, his anger simmering just below the surface. "Now, we figure out our next move. But make no mistake, Rachel, this doesn't mean I forgive you." "Not yet." Rachel nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I understand." That night, Daniel locked himself in his office with the external drive, poring over its contents. As Logan had promised, it was a treasure trove of damning evidence: emails detailing illicit transactions, messages between Nathan and high-profile buyers, and even encrypted files linking Nathan to known criminal organizations. But one document in particular caught Daniel's attention: a detailed ledger of payments made to various individuals involved in the operation. Among the names was one he didn't recognize: L. Cross. The name was listed alongside a series of substantial payments, all routed through offshore accounts. Daniel's instincts told him this was a lead worth pursuing. Whoever L. Cross was, they were a key player in Nathan's network. He picked up his phone and called Logan. "I've got something," Daniel said as soon as Logan answered. "A name, L. Cross. Ring any bells?" Logan was silent for a moment before responding. "I'll look into it. Could be a buyer, a partner, or someone higher up the chain. Either way, it's worth digging into." "Do it," Daniel said. "And keep it quiet. Nathan's already spooked. I don't want him knowing we're closing in." "You got it," Logan replied. The next morning, Daniel confronted Rachel at the kitchen table. She sat across from him, her eyes red and swollen from a sleepless night. "I found a name on the drive," Daniel said, sliding a printout of the ledger toward her. "L. Cross. Who is it?" Rachel's brow furrowed as she scanned the document. "I don't know," she said, shaking her head. "Nathan handled the big deals. He never told me who the buyers were." Daniel studied her face, searching for any sign of deceit. Finally, he nodded, though his suspicion remained. "If you're lying to me—" "I'm not," Rachel interrupted, her voice firm. "I swear." Daniel leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. Whoever L. Cross was, they were a key piece of the puzzle. And Daniel would stop at nothing to uncover the truth, even if it meant dragging Rachel and Nathan down with it. The weight of the name L. Cross hung heavy in Daniel's mind. It was the one missing piece that could tie Nathan's entire operation together, exposing everyone involved. But it was also a dangerous lead. If this person was as deeply entrenched in the art trafficking ring as he suspected, pursuing them could put him, and Rachel, in even greater danger. Logan called early that morning, his voice unusually tense. "Daniel, I've been digging into L. Cross. It's not a name, it's a pseudonym." Daniel frowned, pacing his office. "What do you mean?" "L. Cross is an alias for a high-level buyer who's been operating under the radar for years. They're connected to multiple black market art transactions across Europe, Asia, and now the US. Whoever they are, they're extremely well connected. This isn't just a small-time player, this is someone with resources and influence." Daniel's grip tightened on the phone. "Do you have a real name?" "Not yet," Logan admitted. "But I'm working on it. I've flagged some financial transfers linked to Nathan's accounts. If I can trace them back to their source, we might get a name." "Do it," Daniel said firmly. "And keep me updated." "You got it," Logan replied. "But Daniel, be careful. If this L. Cross catches wind that we're onto them, things could escalate fast." Rachel sat at the dining table, her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes betraying a sleepless night. Daniel entered the room, his expression grim. "Logan's digging into L. Cross," he said, sitting across from her. "He says it's not a person, it's a cover for someone high up in the operation." Rachel looked up, her eyes widening. "Do you think they're connected to Nathan?" "Without a doubt," Daniel replied. "And if we can figure out who they are, we can blow this whole thing wide open." Rachel bit her lip, her hands trembling slightly. Daniel, this is dangerous. These people, they don't play by the rules. Daniel's jaw tightened. Neither do I. Rachel reached across the table, her fingers brushing his. I know I've put you in an impossible position. But if you go after them, promise me you'll be careful. Daniel pulled his hand away, his gaze hard. I'll do what I have to. Careful or not, I'm seeing this through. The day passed in tense silence, with Daniel poring over the files Logan had provided while Rachel stayed out of his way. That evening, Logan called again. I've got something, Logan said. It's not a full name, but it's close. One of the accounts linked to Nathan made a series of payments to a luxury penthouse in Manhattan. The lease is under the name L. Cavanaugh. Cavanaugh, Daniel repeated, his mind racing. You think it's the same person? Could be, Logan replied. It's too much of a coincidence to ignore. I'm running background checks now, but it'll take time. Whoever this is, they've gone to great lengths to stay hidden. Daniel's jaw clenched. Send me the address. I'll handle it. Daniel, don't be stupid, Logan warned. If this is the person behind Nathan, they won't hesitate to take you out. I'm not waiting around for them to make the first move, Daniel said, his tone firm. Send me the address. That night, Daniel prepared to leave for Manhattan. Rachel confronted him as he packed a bag in their bedroom. You're leaving? She asked, her voice shaking. I have to, Daniel said, shoving a pistol into his bag alongside a few changes of clothes. Daniel, this isn't just about Nathan anymore, Rachel said, stepping closer. This is bigger than him, bigger than us. If you go after these people, you could get killed. Daniel zipped the bag and slung it over his shoulder. I don't have a choice, Rachel. If I don't do this, they'll keep coming. They'll destroy everything. Rachel's eyes filled with tears. And what about us? What about fixing what's left of our marriage? Daniel paused in the doorway, his expression unreadable. We'll deal with us later. Right now, I need to stop them. Rachel's voice broke as she called after him. I'm sorry, Daniel. For everything. Daniel didn't respond. He walked out the door, leaving Rachel standing in the bedroom, her sobs muffled by the sound of his car engine roaring to life. The drive to Manhattan was long and tense, the city's towering skyline glowing in the distance as Daniel approached. Logan's intel had given him the address of the penthouse, a high-end building in the heart of the city. It was the kind of place that screamed wealth and power, exactly where Daniel would expect to find someone like L. Cross. He parked a few blocks away and approached on foot, blending into the crowd of late-night pedestrians. The building was guarded by a doorman, but Daniel had come prepared. Flashing a fake badge from his office, he convinced the doorman to let him up, claiming he needed to deliver legal documents. The elevator ride to the penthouse was excruciatingly slow, each ding heightening his anticipation. When the doors finally slid open, Daniel stepped into a sleek, modern space filled with minimalist furniture and abstract art. A voice called out from the adjacent room. You're late. Daniel's hand moved instinctively to the pistol concealed under his jacket as he stepped further inside. A figure emerged from the shadows, a man in his mid-40s, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, his sharp features exuding confidence and control. You must be L. Cavanaugh, Daniel said, his voice cold. The man smirked, swirling a glass of wine in one hand. And you must be Daniel Sanders. Nathan warned me you'd be a problem. Daniel's jaw tightened. Then he underestimated me. Cavanaugh set the glass down, his smirk widening. You've got guts coming here, I'll give you that. But you're out of your league, Mr. Sanders. Whatever you think you're going to accomplish, you're wrong. Daniel pulled his pistol, aiming it squarely at Cavanaugh's chest. We'll see about that. Daniel's hand remained steady, his pistol aimed squarely at Cavanaugh's chest. The penthouse was eerily quiet, the tension in the air thick enough to choke on. Cavanaugh, however, seemed entirely unfazed. His smirk lingered as though Daniel's weapon was nothing more than a harmless gesture. Bold move, Cavanaugh said, his voice dripping with amusement. But you're not going to shoot me, Mr. Sanders. You don't have it in you. Try me, Daniel growled, his finger tightening on the trigger. Cavanaugh chuckled softly, moving to a nearby armchair and sitting down with unhurried grace. He crossed one leg over the other, his posture relaxed. Let's say you pull that trigger. What happens next? Do you think my associates will just let you walk out of here? Do you think they won't come after you, your wife, your entire world? Daniel's grip tightened on the pistol. I'm not leaving here without answers. Cavanaugh leaned forward, his smile fading as his tone turned icy. Then ask your questions, Mr. Sanders. But I suggest you tread carefully. Daniel's pulse thundered in his ears, but he forced himself to remain calm. I want to know everything about Nathan's operation, how he's connected to you and who else is involved. Cavanaugh raised an eyebrow. Nathan's operation? Is that what you think this is? Daniel's brow furrowed. Don't play coy. He's been laundering stolen art through Rachel's gallery, and the money trail leads straight to you. Cavanaugh sighed, rubbing his temple as though Daniel's accusations were a minor annoyance. Nathan is ambitious, I'll give him that. But you're mistaken if you think he's in charge. He's just a cog in a much larger machine. Daniel's stomach churned. Then who's running it? Cavanaugh's gaze turned sharp, his eyes boring into Daniel. Do you really want to know? Because once you learn the truth, there's no going back. Daniel took a step closer, his pistol unwavering. I've already crossed that line. Now talk. Cavanaugh leaned back, his smirk returning. Very well. The operation isn't about the art. That's just a cover, a convenient way to move money and gain access to the right circles. The real prize is information. Blackmail, secrets, leverage. Art is merely the currency we use to buy it. Daniel's mind raced. And Nathan? He's useful, Cavanaugh said with a shrug. Charismatic enough to charm his way into any room, but not clever enough to see the bigger picture. He moves the pieces I tell him to move. Daniel's grip on the pistol faltered slightly. And Rachel? What role does she play in all of this? Cavanaugh's smile widened. Ah, your dear wife. She's quite the enigma, isn't she? So loyal, so desperate to protect you, and yet so easily manipulated. Daniel's chest tightened. What are you talking about? Cavanaugh stood, his movements deliberate. Rachel didn't just stumble into this, Mr. Saunders. She was recruited. Groomed, if you will. Nathan may have been the one to pull her into the gallery, but she's been working for me long before that. Daniel's blood turned to ice. You're lying. Am I? Cavanaugh countered, his tone almost sympathetic. Think about it. Why do you think she agreed to marry you in the first place? Love? Or was it because she knew exactly who you were, how valuable you could be to us? The words hit Daniel like a physical blow, the pistol trembling in his hands. No. That's not true. Cavanaugh stepped closer, his voice soft but cutting. You've built your life around a lie, Mr. Sanders. Rachel has been feeding me information about you, your cases, your weaknesses. Every success you've had as district attorney? I've been there, pulling the strings. Daniel's world tilted on its axis. He wanted to scream, to deny it, to call Cavanaugh a liar. But the pieces of the puzzle began to click together in his mind. Rachel's sudden interest in the gallery, her secrecy, the encrypted messages. It had all been leading to this. You're bluffing, Daniel said finally, his voice shaking with rage. Rachel loves me. She'd never do this. Cavanaugh's smile turned pitying. Believe what you want. But deep down, you already know the truth. Before Daniel could respond, the sound of a door creaking open behind him made his heart stop. He turned quickly, his pistol ready, and froze when he saw Rachel standing there, her face pale and her eyes wide with fear. Daniel, she whispered, her voice trembling. What are you doing here? Daniel's gaze darted between her and Cavanaugh, his mind reeling. You followed me? Rachel nodded slowly, stepping further into the room. I was worried. You left without saying anything, and I. Save it. Daniel snapped, his voice cold. Cavanaugh says you've been working for him? Feeding him information about me. Tell me he's lying. Rachel's face crumpled, tears spilling down her cheeks. Daniel, I can explain. Answer the question. Daniel shouted, his voice echoing off the walls. Rachel flinched, her sobs growing louder. It's not what you think. I didn't want to hurt you. I didn't have a choice. There's always a choice. Daniel interrupted, his voice laced with fury. And you chose to betray me. Cavanaugh watched the scene unfold with detached amusement, his smirk never faltering. You see, Mr. Sanders? The truth has a way of revealing itself. Daniel turned back to Cavanaugh, his eyes blazing. Shut up. Rachel stepped closer, her hands outstretched. Daniel, please. I love you. I never wanted this to happen. I was trying to protect you. Daniel shook his head, his heart breaking with every word. You've destroyed everything, Rachel. Everything. The room fell silent, the weight of the moment pressing down on all of them. Cavanaugh took a step back, his voice calm and measured. What happens next is up to you, Mr. Sanders. But I suggest you choose wisely. The people I work for don't take betrayal lightly. Daniel's mind raced as he weighed his options. He could arrest Cavanaugh, take him in, and hope the system would bring him down. But with the power and influence Cavanaugh claimed to have, would it even matter? Or he could end it here and now, taking justice into his own hands. Make your choice, Cavanaugh said softly. But remember, every action has consequences. Daniel's finger hovered over the trigger as he stared at the man who had destroyed his life. Daniel's pistol felt heavier in his hand than it ever had before. The weight wasn't just physical, it was the burden of everything that had unraveled in the last few days. Cavanaugh's calm smirk, Rachel's tear-streaked face, and the echo of her betrayal all swirled in his mind like a storm. Daniel, please, Rachel whispered, taking a cautious step forward. Put the gun down. We can talk about this. Talk? Daniel snapped, his voice cracking under the strain. You want to talk, Rachel? After what you've done? After everything I just heard? Her face crumpled, but she didn't back away. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I was trying to protect you, protect us. Protect us? Daniel spat, his gaze darting between Rachel and Cavanaugh. Is that why you've been feeding him information about me? Is that why you've been lying to me for years? Rachel's sobs grew louder, her words tumbling out in a desperate rush. He forced me, Daniel. He said if I didn't cooperate, he'd ruin you. Your career, your reputation, everything you've worked for. I didn't know how to stop it. You could have told me. Daniel shouted, his voice raw. You could have trusted me instead of him. Cavanaugh chuckled softly from his seat, drawing Daniel's attention. It's funny, isn't it? The lengths people will go to when they think they're doing the right thing. Daniel turned on him, his pistol now aimed directly at the man's chest. Shut up. I've had enough of your games. Cavanaugh's smirk didn't falter. Go ahead, Mr. Sanders. Pull the trigger. But ask yourself, what happens next? You think killing me will solve your problems? It won't. You'll just be another man who let his emotions get the better of him. Daniel's hand trembled slightly, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. He had faced high-pressure situations before, but nothing like this. The idea of taking justice into his own hands felt both liberating and terrifying. Daniel, Rachel said softly, her voice breaking. You're not a killer. You're better than this. Her words cut deep, but they didn't soothe him. He glanced at her, his expression filled with anguish. And what about you, Rachel? What are you? She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the steady thrum of Daniel's pulse in his ears. Finally, Daniel lowered the pistol, his shoulders sagging as the adrenaline drained from his body. He turned back to Cavanaugh, his voice cold and firm. You're right. Killing you won't solve anything. But don't think for a second that I'm letting you walk away from this. Cavanaugh's smirk faded slightly, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. And what's your plan, Mr. Sanders? Turn me over to the authorities? You know as well as I do that nothing will stick. My connections run deep. We'll see about that. Daniel replied, pulling a pair of zip ties from his pocket. Turn around. Cavanaugh's eyes narrowed, but he complied, his movements deliberate. Daniel secured his wrists tightly behind his back, ignoring the man's smug demeanor. Logan's waiting outside, Daniel said. He'll make sure you're delivered to the proper authorities. Cavanaugh chuckled. You think this is the end? It's not. You've just made yourself a target, Mr. Sanders. And targets don't last long in this game. Daniel ignored the threat, hauling Cavanaugh to his feet and leading him toward the elevator. Rachel followed behind silently, her face pale and drawn. Logan was waiting in an unmarked car a block away, his expression grim as Daniel loaded Cavanaugh into the back seat. Got him, Daniel said, slamming the door shut. Logan glanced at Cavanaugh in the rearview mirror. You've stirred up a hornet's nest, Sanders. This guy has powerful friends. They won't take this lightly. I don't care, Daniel said firmly. Just get him to the station. I'll handle the fallout. Logan nodded, his gaze serious. Be careful, Daniel. This isn't over. Daniel and Rachel drove home in silence, the weight of the night settling over them like a heavy fog. When they pulled into the driveway, Rachel finally spoke. What happens now? She asked, her voice small. Daniel stared straight ahead, his grip on the steering wheel tight. That depends on you. Rachel turned to face him, her eyes pleading. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this, Daniel. I swear. Daniel shook his head, his voice cold. You don't fix something like this, Rachel. You live with the consequences. She flinched at his words, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. I love you, Daniel. I never stopped. Daniel laughed bitterly, the sound devoid of humor. Love? Don't talk to me about love. If you loved me, you wouldn't have betrayed me. Rachel's sobs grew louder, but Daniel didn't offer her any comfort. He got out of the car and walked into the house, leaving her sitting in the driveway, consumed by her guilt. Later that night, Daniel sat alone in his office, staring at the files spread out before him. Cavanaugh's arrest was a small victory, but he knew it was far from the end. Whoever Cavanaugh worked for would come looking for retribution. And when they did, Daniel would be ready. As he leaned back in his chair, his phone buzzed with a message from Logan. They're already moving. Watch your back. Daniel's jaw tightened as he read the words. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. But he wasn't backing down. Not until every last thread of Nathan's operation was unraveled. The message from Logan stayed with Daniel long after he read it. They're already moving. Watch your back. It wasn't just a warning, it was a promise of what was to come. Daniel knew the kind of people he was up against. Cavanaugh was just one piece of a much larger puzzle, and taking him out of play had undoubtedly sent shockwaves through the operation. As the hours passed, Daniel's unease grew. The house felt too quiet, the shadows too deep. Even Rachel's presence, usually a source of comfort despite their recent strife, now felt like a liability. The first sign of trouble came the next morning. Daniel's phone buzzed with a call from Logan. Daniel, we've got a problem, Logan said, his tone grim. Cavanaugh's already made bail. Daniel's stomach dropped. How? He was caught red-handed. Connections, Logan said bitterly. He didn't even spend 12 hours in custody. He's already back in play. Damn it, Daniel muttered, pacing his office. What about the evidence on the drive? We're working on it, Logan said. But it's going to take time to build a solid case. And Cavanaugh's people aren't going to sit around waiting for that to happen. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, his frustration mounting. Do we have eyes on him? Not yet, Logan admitted. But I'll find him. In the meantime, you need to be careful. They know you're a threat now, and they'll do whatever it takes to neutralize you. By midday, the tension had become unbearable. Rachel had barely spoken since the confrontation with Cavanaugh, her guilt and fear written all over her face. Daniel watched her as she sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea. Anything you want to tell me? Daniel asked, his voice sharp. Rachel looked up, startled. What do you mean? Cavanaugh's out, Daniel said bluntly. If he comes for us, I need to know everything. No more lies, Rachel. If there's anything you haven't told me, now is the time. Rachel hesitated, her gaze dropping to the table. There's nothing else, she said softly. I've told you everything. Daniel's jaw tightened. You'd better hope that's true. That night, the retaliation began. Daniel was sitting in his office, reviewing case files, when the sound of shattering glass jolted him upright. He grabbed his pistol and rushed downstairs, his heart pounding. Rachel? He called out, his voice tense. I'm here. Rachel's voice came from the living room, laced with panic. Daniel found her crouched behind the couch, her face pale. A brick lay on the floor, surrounded by shards of broken glass from the front window. Attached to the brick was a piece of paper, its message scrawled in bold, threatening letters. Stay out of this, or the next one won't miss. Daniel's grip on his pistol tightened as he scanned the room, his gaze darting to the open window. The street outside was quiet, but he knew better than to assume the threat had passed. Get upstairs, Daniel ordered Rachel. Now. She nodded quickly, her fear evident, and ran up the stairs. Daniel called Logan immediately. They've already made their move, Daniel said, his voice low but furious. They threw a brick through my window with a thread attached. Damn it, Logan muttered. They're trying to rattle you. Don't let them. I won't, Daniel said. But I need to know who we're dealing with. Did you find anything else on Cavanaugh's connections? Nothing solid yet, Logan admitted. But if they're resorting to scare tactics, it means they're nervous. They know you're a threat. Then it's time to make them more nervous, Daniel said, his tone cold. Keep digging, Logan. I'm not backing down. Rachel didn't sleep that night. Daniel sat by the front door, his pistol in hand, keeping watch. The broken window was a stark reminder of how vulnerable they were, and Daniel's resolve hardened with every passing hour. When dawn finally broke, Daniel stood and stretched, his body aching from the tense night. He found Rachel sitting at the kitchen table, her eyes bloodshot and her hands trembling. They're not going to stop, are they? She asked softly. No, Daniel said bluntly. Not until we take them down. Rachel looked up at him, her expression filled with guilt and desperation. I want to help, Daniel. I need to make this right. Daniel stared at her for a long moment, weighing her words. Then start by telling me everything you know about Cavanaugh's operation. Every detail, no matter how small. Rachel nodded, her resolve hardening. Okay. I'll tell you everything. Rachel's account was more detailed than Daniel had expected. She described the private meetings, the coded messages, and the art deals that served as a cover for laundering money. She admitted to passing along information about Daniel's cases, though she insisted it was only to keep Cavanaugh from turning on her. I didn't realize how deep it went, Rachel said, her voice trembling. I thought I could keep it separate, but it kept spiraling out of control. Daniel listened in silence, his anger simmering beneath the surface. When she finished, he stood and grabbed his keys. Where are you going? Rachel asked, panic creeping into her voice. To get ahead of this, Daniel said. Stay here. Lock the doors. Don't answer the phone unless it's me. Daniel, please. Don't argue with me. Daniel snapped. You wanted to help? Start by staying out of the way. Daniel drove to Logan's office, his mind racing. The retaliation had escalated things, but it also gave him leverage. Whoever had thrown that brick had made a mistake. They had exposed their fear. Now, it was Daniel's turn to strike back. Daniel arrived at Logan's office just after sunrise, his jaw tight with resolve. Logan was already waiting, a fresh stack of papers spread out across his desk. His expression was as grim as Daniel had ever seen. We've got a lead, Logan said without preamble. A connection between Cavanaugh's offshore accounts and a private security firm. The firm's been tied to several high-profile intimidation cases. They're likely the ones who threw that brick last night. Daniel leaned over the desk, scanning the documents. Who's running the firm? A man named Victor Shaw, Logan replied. Former mercenary turned fixer. He handles the dirty work for people like Cavanaugh, scare tactics, disappearances, whatever it takes to keep the operation intact. Daniel's eyes darkened. Where do we find him? Logan hesitated. He operates out of a warehouse on the outskirts of town. But Daniel, this guy isn't like the others. He won't hesitate to kill if he thinks you're a threat. Daniel straightened, his expression hard. Good. That makes two of us. The warehouse was an imposing structure, its rusted metal walls surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. Daniel parked his car a block away and approached on foot, his pistol holstered under his jacket. The air was heavy with the scent of oil and damp earth as he crouched near the fence, observing the guards patrolling the perimeter. Logan had warned him that Shaw would have reinforcements, but Daniel wasn't here for a firefight. He was here to end things once and for all. He waited for an opening, slipping through a gap in the fence and moving silently toward the warehouse. The guards were armed but inattentive, their confidence betraying an assumption that no one would dare come after them. Daniel slipped through the side entrance, his heart pounding. The interior of the warehouse was dimly lit, crates stacked haphazardly against the walls. Voices echoed from an adjacent room, and Daniel moved toward them, his steps careful and deliberate. Inside, Victor Shaw stood with two men, his grizzled face set in a permanent scowl. A table in front of them was covered in maps, files, and photographs, some of which Daniel recognized as surveillance images of himself and Rachel. Shaw's voice was cold as he addressed his men. Cavanaugh's mishandled this. Sanders should have been neutralized the moment he became a problem. Now it's up to us to clean up the mess. Daniel stepped into the room, his pistol aimed squarely at Shaw's chest. The only mess here is you, Shaw. The guards moved to draw their weapons, but Daniel's voice stopped them cold. Don't even think about it. He warned, his tone deadly. You make a move, and I won't hesitate. Shaw smirked, his hands resting casually on the table. You've got guts, Sanders. I'll give you that. But you're out of your league. Daniel took a step closer, his pistol steady. You and Cavanaugh thought you could scare me into submission. You were wrong. Shaw's smirk faded, his eyes narrowing. What's your endgame here, Sanders? You think killing me will stop this? You think it'll make any difference? It'll make a difference to the people you've hurt, Daniel said coldly. And it'll send a message to the rest of your operation, you're not untouchable. Shaw chuckled darkly. You think you're a hero, don't you? But heroes don't last long in my world. Daniel didn't respond. He fired a single shot, the bullet slamming into Shaw's shoulder and sending him crashing to the ground. The guards froze, their hands raised in surrender. Don't test me, Daniel warned them, his voice like ice. Shaw groaned, clutching his bleeding shoulder, as he glared up at Daniel. You're making a mistake, Sanders. This won't end with me. No, Daniel said, his tone steady. It ends with all of you. With Shaw incapacitated, Daniel forced one of the guards to zip-tie his hands and feet. He secured the remaining men and called Logan, his voice clipped. I've got Shaw. He's alive, but barely. Good, Logan replied. I'll send a team to pick him up. Stay there and keep him secure. By the time Logan's team arrived, Shaw was unconscious from blood loss, and Daniel was leaning against a crate, his exhaustion evident. You did it, Logan said as his men cuffed Shaw and loaded him into a waiting van. It's not over yet, Daniel said, his voice rough. Cavanaugh's still out there. And whoever's above him. We'll find them, Logan assured him. But for now, you've struck a serious blow. This operation is falling apart, and it's all because of you. When Daniel returned home that evening, Rachel was waiting for him. She looked up from the couch as he entered, her expression filled with a mix of relief and fear. You're okay, she whispered, her voice trembling. Daniel nodded, setting his pistol on the kitchen counter. Shaw's been taken into custody. Logan's team is interrogating him now. Rachel stood, wringing her hands nervously. And Cavanaugh? Still out there, Daniel admitted. But he's running scared. His operation is crumbling, and it's only a matter of time before we bring him in. Rachel stepped closer, her eyes searching his. What about us, Daniel? Is there any chance? Daniel held up a hand, stopping her. Don't, Rachel. Not now. Her face crumpled, but she nodded, stepping back. Daniel sank into a chair, his body heavy with exhaustion. He didn't know what the future held, for his career, his marriage, or his fight against Cavanaugh. But for the first time in weeks, he felt a glimmer of hope. Justice was coming. And Daniel would make sure of it.